Hello, team. It's Livy Red, and welcome back to Today is the Future. First of all, did I say I was going to start posting twice a month? Yes. Did I do that? No, I didn't. You know what happened? I didn't feel like it. Okay? I thought, do I feel like it? Not really. So I didn't. But now I'm going to, supposedly, gonna commit for the most part. And who knows if that for the most part will overpower the commit. Only way to find out, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Okay? Can Livy commit to her word? Breaking news, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Okay? Just went to Ireland and Scotland. Well, okay, first of all, hold up. Rewind. Today we're going to be talking about the generational war that is particularly occurs on the interwebs between especially the boomers, slightly below the boomers. I don't know what that is, like Gen, like my parents' age, and Gen Z. They don't like us. Not all of them, okay? Not all of them. The boomers in my life love me, okay? And I love them. But on the interwebs, it seems to be that they're, and especially in corporate career settings, they don't like us. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about, is Gen Z actually weaker? Is Gen Z actually lazier? And we'll talk about it. Before I do, just got back from Ireland and Scotland. Beautiful place. Beautiful place. Okay? Great food. I'm serious. Y'all are like, ooh, UK, they eat beans and bread. No. Y'all ever chowed down on a minced pie? Ever chowed down on one of those ice cookies with a little gumdrop on top? Ever chowed down on a sausage roll? Okay, get your mind out of the gutter. First of all, ever chowed down on a well-seasoned sausage roll? About to order me an Irish cookbook, a Scottish cookbook. And I'll be back with results. Yeah, I really liked the food. The greenery was lovely. I think the happiest state of euphoria I could possibly achieve as a human being would be if you set me in one of those beautiful green fields next to a beach or lake in Ireland that is filled with baby lambs and gave me a bowl of my mom's chicken broccoli casserole. I think at that point I would be willing to die and be willing to happily sail off to the next state of being. Okay? Yeah. And then like maybe throw on some Irish, that traditional Irish music simultaneously. Goes crazy. First of all, have you ever heard bagpipes in a house song? Look into it. It exists. It exists. They're throwing around bagpipes in the bars and the clubs. Anyway, I went off on a tangent. I apologize. Second elephant to address before I get into the meat and potatoes. This is me. This is Livy. This is not a small Dutch boy. Okay? I was a victim to two things. I thought I would come out of an antidepressant withdrawal unscathed without ending up giving myself a bad haircut or bad bangs. I didn't. I didn't get out of it without cutting myself bad bangs. I fell victim. And I don't blame myself. I blame the design of the universe. You can't go through a mental crisis without bad bangs. I don't know what it is. Additionally, fell victim to a Brad Mondo tutorial. Okay? I've used this Brad Mondo tutorial many times to give myself curtain bangs. However, Brad Mondo because you're definitely watching this, I need you to add a warning sign about 4 minutes into your video about cutting your own curtain bangs. You want to know why? Because you tell us to go this way, cut it short. We bring it back, we're cutting again. You need to put a warning when we're over here. Hey, we're about to go shorter after this. It's going to get even shorter. Do you know what happens? I cut them here, right? Bring them over here, cut them to about here. Bring them back, they end up about here. I got curly hair, so they dry, they end up here. You want to know how many times I've used that tutorial and butchered my hair Dutch boy style? About 5. I never learn because a year goes by, I forget. And so every time there's just once a year period where I watch that tutorial and I'm a Dutch boy for about a month. And if you just put in a label in the video and we're like, hey, if you don't want to look like a little Dutch boy, cut them to about your chin. Okay? Cut them, like, be prepared. Be prepared. Look alive, people. So, you know, in my Dutch boy era, had to spend a long time to even get them looking half decent where they're at. Whatever. Basically have a middle bang French at this point in time is what it is. So going into the meat and potatoes, is Gen Z weaker and lazier? Obviously, my answer is no. But not because I am a Gen Z constituent. This is because anger towards young generations is a historic pattern. Historically, older generations don't like younger generations. This is all generalizing. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule. And before I go into defending why I don't think that statement is true, that Gen Z is weaker or lazier than previous generations, because there's, you see a lot of stuff on social media about like showing previous generations in war times or working labor heavy jobs, having kids quite young and learning to what work is required to raise a family at a very early age. However, I don't think it's a proper comparison. And before I get into that, I do want to say, I'm going to put it out there, Gen Z, we have our things. We are not a faultless generation. There's a lot of virtue signaling that goes on in Gen Z. There's a lot of over-labeling. There's a lot of explosive jumping to conclusions. Sometimes I feel like there is an extreme lack of nuance to discussions that I have with people within Gen Z. Again, also generalizations. And honestly, I feel like people in this pod that listen to my podcast might not be so much falling under those generalizations, but it's definitely a theme I see as someone that regularly is speaking to and working with people in Gen Z. And now that I've stated that, yeah, it's a historic trend that a few generations above the generation that is currently in their teens and 20s, there seems to be a hostility or disrespect or disagreeance with a few generations below them. And on top of that, there's a historic disliking and underestimating of young people. We have underestimated young people for centuries, truly. There are some cultures that are an exception. However, I would venture to say historically, we grossly underestimate young people. However, it's very interesting because oftentimes young people, this is now speaking more to the history of the United States, are the backbone of the people that create culture and music and media and change. And so it's very interesting for young people to be so grossly underestimated while also being the backbone of so many industries and culture shifts. And As far as the argument of Gen Z being weaker or lazier, it's just not a fair comparison. Every generation has certain privileges and also certain struggles that previous generations didn't. For example, if we look at my parents' generations, people in their 50s, 60s, there was less progress had been made. There was a lot of people having to hide who they truly were. Racism was socially acceptable. There was there was a different type of hustle that had to be done because the internet wasn't there. So you kind of had to grind it out with whatever job you could get, because there was only, so many resources to find work. You couldn't work from home. So there was that. However, there was a different sense of community at that time period. There was less overwhelm because of how much information we are fed on a daily basis. I think it was easier to be focused at that time period because you weren't at people's beck and call, with a phone you keep in your pocket. There weren't as many distractions on demand. That group of people didn't go through fundamental developmental periods during a global pandemic. There's just fundamental differences between generations, and I think trying to compare of who is better, who is this, who is weak, who is strong, is just it leaves no room for nuance and paying attention to difference in environmental and cultural circumstances in every generation. The world changes so drastically. The environment every generation is growing up in is so vastly different from the one before it. And so I don't think it's a fair comparison at the very forefront. And every generation has their things. And so when I see people really dying on that hill that Gen Z is very weak and lazy, I find it very frustrating. Also, just working with this generation, and being a part of it, I feel so honored to be a part of a generation that has created so many movements, progressed us towards being is moving more towards the importance of emotional intelligence, caring about our mental health, healing. And there is such an insane strength to this generation that absolutely floors me. And so when I see those comparisons, I find it really frustrating. Because additionally, going back to young people being underestimated historically, I think that's such a shame, because there is 1000% a wisdom in young people and children that adults do not have. Adults in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s are not that they don't have it, but are often more far removed. There's an intuition, there is a flexibility for learning and creating who they are that young people have. There is a deeper awareness and connection to who they are, what they want, because there hasn't been as many barriers and life experiences that have set up blockages and walls to access those things. And that wisdom being silenced and underestimated is such a shame. We really underestimate the wisdom that young people also contain. And I feel very passionate about this topic because this was actually the part of the core of why I started what I do, why this podcast is called Today is the Future. This podcast initially started because I was only interviewing people in their 20s and teens and even adolescents. And that was why this podcast was called Today is the Future, because I felt so strongly that we were often being told that we were the future. We were the future leaders and we needed to prep to be the future. When today is the future, why are we the future when today can be the future? Like, what are we waiting for? I don't know. I don't understand that. Also, as I said previously, young people are the backbone of so much change and culture and media and ideas. But that was the reason why I started this podcast, was because I felt so strongly about young people being the leaders of today and not the future. And so I started, and I rarely heard young people specifically being put on platforms to talk about the things that I talk about: emotional skills, communication skills, their life experience, their thoughts on mental health. And I just thought that was crazy, because there's a different angle and wisdom that young people can lend. And I remember the very first post I ever put on social media that had to do with what I do now said, young people are going to change the world, and the world needs young minds to change it. And I am a firm believer in that, of the wisdom and power in young people, if we simply offer them to the space to listen and the respect to listen. Because the wisdom of experience is only a sector of wisdom that exists in the human experience. There's so much wisdom of people in every stage of life that simply is just in different fonts. And I'm a firm believer in that. And kind of shifting, I think also there is this kind of generational disagreement about Gen Z being lazier, harder to work with, weaker. Simply because I don't think it's so much that Gen Z is lazy or unwilling to work hard. I think it's honestly just a difference in values. Gen Z is unwilling to sacrifice their life. If we're talking about careers specifically, unwilling generally to sacrifice their life and their happiness for a career. And you want to know why that is? Because they saw their parents do it. We changed our behavior. We saw intimately what it was like to live that way. And additionally, on top of that, it's quite interesting because Gen Z was infused with the value of prioritizing mental health by the older generations. I think those of you who are listening probably remember, I remember watching Disney Channel and seeing stuff all the time about, go outside and exercise for your body and mental health, talking about mental health. And mental health organizations were being founded in these fundamental early stages of our life in the United States. Around 2012, 2014, that's when the big mental health shift happened. And when even on a governmental scale, we started caring more about talking about mental health and emotional skills. And so we were being, even in our media, pushed on a corporate scale that mental health mattered, that physical health mattered. And then now that Gen Z is unwilling to waver on that value, I think it causes a lot of frustration for people in older generations in the working environment. And I find that very interesting. And there are, of course, always going to be people that are just lazy, that are just haven't learned to be resilient. There are some people that are just young people that are just hard to work with, that aren't very good at communicating, that are a bit extremist. Because sometimes that like protecting my peace is done to an extreme extent, where it's like, well, struggling and being unhappy is not the same thing as protecting your peace. Sometimes we are going to struggle. Sometimes we are going to be unhappy. Sometimes we're going to have to persevere through less than ideal circumstances. I don't seem to sound like I'm putting older generations down, because I get it. I would be confused too. It's confusing when someone has a difference in values than you. And for those generations, when they were our age, they weren't allowed to value those things. They were not given the space or the backing to value those things. And so no one is at fault. We're throwing anger at each other when the situation is actually quite natural. And I think, just in conclusion, every generation is just different, and the ability to compare is just not there. And I think wanting to label and generalize is at the core of a lot of our age-based, party-based, race-based divide in the United States. It's the especially social media driven tendency to generalize, label, and compare. And it doesn't leave room for nuance, because also the information you're getting fed on your social media, it has to be slightly extreme to reach you. The algorithm is not going to push stuff that is nuance. Um and so uh I have so much respect for my parents' generations, for the millennial generation, for the groundwork they set for Gen Z to now stand on business and demand change. And I think like, in conclusion, I think it's silly. I think it's silly that we're mad at older generations and they're mad at us, because it's so it's just silly. There's, you know, maybe Gen Z isn't weak and lacks resiliency. Maybe you just made a bad hire and they happen to be young. Maybe older folks and boomers aren't only career driven and don't care about your mental health. Maybe you just had a bad boss, you know? Maybe you didn't quite look into the values of the company that you went into, and maybe that's on you. Yeah. I think our inability to be fluid in the way we label and generalize is it's dangerous. So that's my 2 cents on that. I think just like every relationship literally to exist on the planet, the downfall is not just the ability to communicate, it's the inability to comprehend someone else with empathy, to take a moment to release your own experiences and values, to try and take a look at, well, why are they thinking and feeling that way based on their background and the information that they may have. And I think we all need to do that. Well, really, in all scenarios, but a lot of that conversation comes from roots in career based scenarios and corporate culture. So I am also very excited to see companies also begin to realize that having your employees feel more heard actually makes you more money and makes you more productive. And people, people that are reigning with an iron fist can only last so long, because we need to cover basic fundamental needs of a human being to create productivity and for people to create buy-in into their careers. And I'm excited to see this shift. And I think, there's an interesting natural pendulum of oftentimes we're over here, really far over here, and it swings and we get really far over extreme on the other side. And I think in the next 10-20 years we're going to find this really really beautiful equilibrium for a while. And I think workplaces are hopefully going to improve. So thank you for listening. I would love to hear anyone else's thoughts on this. If you're on Spotify, you can leave your thoughts in the little Q&A spot that it gives you. Also, feel free to DM me. I'll probably post some of these clips on social media. Leave your thoughts under those posts. Subscribe, follow me on Instagram and TikTok. And I would really love to hear your thoughts on this. And I will see you in the next episode.